Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating, deeply layered, and honestly, kind of bizarre narrative found right in the middle of the book of Ruth. We're looking specifically at the first 5 verses of chapter 3. Now, if you've ever felt like ancient historical texts are just, dry and dusty, well, buckle up. The source material we're digging into today is literally packed with dramatic turning points, crazy psychological shifts, and ancient legal maneuvers that absolutely still carry profound meaning for us today. Okay, let's dive into this because we've got to address the seemingly scandalous elephant in the room right off the bat. According to the text, an older widow named Naomi tells her widowed daughter-in-law, Ruth, to wait until a guy named Boaz finishes eating and drinking, wait for him to fall asleep at the threshing floor, sneak up in the pitch dark, uncover his feet, and lie down. I mean, to our modern ears, that sounds incredibly strange, right? Highly inappropriate and just extremely risky. So what in the world is really going on here? Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the midnight proposal. Then, decode the ancient laws of redemption. Look at Naomi's restored faith. See Boaz as a righteous example, examine Ruth's simple obedience, and wrap it all up with the ultimate redeemer. Let's get right to it. Section 1. The Midnight Proposal, a bizarre plan. So the source text sets the scene right after the barley and wheat harvests have officially wrapped up. Over the past couple months, Naomi and Ruth have experienced this beautiful season of grace where God provided for them so they wouldn't starve. But, mere survival isn't the goal anymore. It's time to secure a permanent home. So Naomi pulls Ruth aside and gives her this highly specific 4-step action plan. Step 1, wash and put on perfume. 2, put on your very best clothes. 3, head down to the threshing floor but stay completely hidden until Boaz finishes eating and drinking. And 4, watch exactly where he lies down, sneak over, uncover his feet, lie down, and wait for his instructions. Again, if we just slap our modern cultural lenses onto these steps, we're going to completely miss the actual point. The source material makes it crystal clear. We have got to dismantle our modern biases right here. This is not Naomi directing some scandalous hookup. And it isn't an ancient Cinderella story where a poor, helpless girl magically marries into wealth either. The ancient reality is that this act was a highly solemn, legally binding proposal. Naomi and Ruth are essentially activating an ancient Israelite legal duty. They're making a formal, albeit pretty bold, request for protection and redemption under the law. Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. Ancient laws of redemption, the rules of the game. To truly grasp the gravity of what Ruth is doing, we've got to understand the legal framework of the day. It starts with the kinsman redeemer law, which you'll find back in Leviticus 25. Basically, if an Israelite became so impoverished they had to sell off their family land, a close relative, a kinsman redeemer, had the legal obligation to step in and buy that land back. This ensured the property stayed within the family and the wider tribe. Now, in our story, Boaz is a close relative of Naomi's deceased husband. Therefore, he literally holds the right and the duty to redeem their lost property. Then there's the second law, levirate marriage, found in Deuteronomy 25. If a man died without an heir, his brother or a close relative was required to marry the widow. The first son born to them would then carry on the deceased man's name and inherit his property. And as the source highlights, these weren't just cold, bureaucratic, dusty old rules. No, they were designed by a merciful God to protect vulnerable groups like widows, to preserve family lineages, and to basically provide a safety net for the weak. This right here is the legal game board Naomi is playing on. Which brings us to Section 3, Naomi's restored faith, from bitterness to hope. Now, have you ever felt just totally stripped of hope? Maybe even found yourself blaming God during a really deep season of hardship? Because that is exactly where Naomi started. If we look at this timeline drawn from the source, we see this amazing psychological transformation. On day 1, when Naomi first returned to Bethlehem, she was entirely broken. She famously declared that God had made her life bitter and brought her back empty. But jump ahead to month 2, after watching God faithfully provide food through Ruth's gleaning, her perspective starts to shift. And today, here in chapter 3, she's no longer paralyzed by that bitterness. Instead, she's acting with hopeful faith for the future. So the crucial point is that Naomi's risky plan at the threshing floor isn't just some clever human scheming. It represents a totally revived trust in God's promises. She stopped blaming God. She actually started trusting that those protective laws we just talked about were real and active. She took bold action based on hope, famously telling Ruth she wanted to find a happy home for her. Remember, this is during the time of the Judges, which was a really dark historical period where everyone just did what was right in their own eyes. So Naomi's rekindled faith here, it's a massive spark of light. Moving right along to section 4, Boaz, a righteous example. So what actually caused Naomi's faith to spark back to life? Well, she'd been carefully observing Boaz over the entire 2-month harvest season. His unwavering character was exactly the catalyst she needed. And this just brilliantly illustrates how true character works, right? I mean, you might be able to fake being a good person for a day or two, but you absolutely cannot fake it every single day for 2 months out in the hot fields. Boaz showed consistent kindness. He didn't just follow the bare letter of the law by letting Ruth glean. He totally exceeded the minimum requirements, making sure she was safe and well-fed. He genuinely cared for the marginalized. He lived out the merciful spirit of the law, basically proving to a bitter Naomi that God's goodness wasn't just some ancient history lesson, it was alive and well right there in Boaz's fields. The source connects Boaz's actions so beautifully to this later biblical principle from 1 Thessalonians 5:14. Notice that Boaz didn't sit Naomi down and give her some long, dry theological lecture on God's sovereignty and her suffering. Instead, he just lived a consistently righteous life. He encouraged the disheartened and helped the weak simply through his daily actions. Never underestimate how just living with integrity and kindness can profoundly heal and encourage the people around you who might be struggling with their own faith. All right, section 5, Ruth's simple obedience, stepping into the unknown. Keep in mind, Ruth is a foreigner. She's from Moab, so she likely did not have a deep, intricate grasp of the complex Israelite laws of kinsman redeemers and levirate marriage. For her, this is stepping entirely into the unknown. Yet her response to Naomi's bizarre plan is just incredibly striking. She says, "I will do whatever you say." It's this profound, uncomplicated obedience. She doesn't argue, she doesn't demand a full legal briefing before she acts. She simply trusts. It kind of makes you stop and ask yourself, what is something in your own life right now that requires Ruth's level of simple obedience? Where are you overthinking things instead of just stepping out in faith? The source text makes a really fascinating observation here about the very nature of faith. A lot of times we learn all these facts about God. We know the rules, we know the history, but we still feel spiritually dry. Why is that? It's because obedience is the necessary bridge. You learn the promises, you practice simple obedience, even when it's scary or frankly doesn't fully make sense, and that is when you actually step into experiencing living grace. Ruth is about to transition from merely knowing facts about Israel's God to profoundly experiencing his grace, all because she just simply obeyed. Which brings us to our final point, section 6, the ultimate redeemer, the grand climax. Now, what's really amazing here is that this story of Ruth and Boaz isn't just some heartwarming historical romance. It actually points directly toward a much, much greater historical figure. While Boaz was an earthly redeemer who stepped up to save one single impoverished family, the source reminds us that this entire narrative is ultimately pointing us toward Jesus Christ. Christ is portrayed as the ultimate kinsman redeemer. Just as Boaz had both the right and the willingness to redeem Ruth, Hebrews 7:25 tells us that Christ is able to save completely those who come to him. He pays the ultimate price to buy back and protect those who are spiritually impoverished. And that leads us to our final takeaway. Think about it. Naomi told Ruth she had to wash, put on perfume, and dress up in her absolute finest clothes just to approach her Redeemer at the threshing floor. But the beautiful, provocative truth of the ultimate Redeemer is this. You don't need to dress up. You don't need to clean yourself up or put on some kind of spiritual perfume to approach God. Because Christ covers us completely. Literally, all that is required is the simple, uncomplicated faith of Ruth. So what's holding you back from approaching your Redeemer today? Thanks for hanging out with us for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll catch you next time.